Welcome to a Focus Fire Chat. Let's chat. We're recording this offline on October 27th, 2019. Usually I would put the Twitch thing in here, so it's pardon me for my randomness here. But as always, we want to give a big shout out to the community for putting up with us. I think we're going to actually use this as our Thanksgiving episode. So by the time you guys are hearing this, we will be offline this week, but we're going to be giving this out to kind of give everyone a filler, if you will, during that week. But as with most of the Let's Chats, these are going to be just more just casual sitting down with ourselves, myself and Green, and then we will usually have a guest on. And this week, our guest is the infamous LittleSheBear.
LittleSheBear.
LittleSheBear. Gosh, you know what? This is what happens when I go off a combination of memory and impromptu-ness.
And caffeine.
And caffeine. Oh, I need more caffeine, actually. That's definitely the thing. But just normal, real quick question for you, SheBear. Where can we find you out on the internets?
If you see someone called LittleSheBear on the internet, chances are it's me. I've had this username for years. So I'm on AO3, Twitter. I'm more Kelly on Twitter because that's Elvish for LittleSheBear. I'm also Lord of the Rings. So
Wondered.
Yeah, LittleSheBear was taken, so I went with the Queen. Yeah, more Kelly.
Nice. I know since this is kind of just an impromptu type interview to start things out, you and I had a chance to talk a little bit before we started recording about your background and your specialties, because I noticed on Twitter you are a very staunch supporter and whatnot of having realistic perspectives of what's going on with each of the characters, and you have a very interesting insight into the writing process. And I wanted for our listeners to understand a little bit of your background. Tell them about your philosophy and law and all the different degrees you hold at this point.
All the things, yeah. I originally went to university in St Andrews, Scotland, to study English literature, but I did philosophy to fill out my credit. But I was doing a lot better in philosophy, so I just switched over. But I still love English lit. But for philosophy, I specialized in philosophy of art. I ended up doing a master's. I did the ontology of artworks for my master's degree, which basically means I studied how artworks exist. Like, what's the difference between how music exists and how a painting exists. And then I worked for a bit in the nonprofit sector. Then I went back to study law, and then the credit crunch happened. So I went back to university and did a master's in visual culture, which is it's across, visual culture is like a cross-discipline. It takes in like advertising, art history, philosophy, English literature, all sorts of different things, game studies, and I wrote a thesis as a critical analysis of journey with a particular emphasis on the technological sublime. The sublime being that state of being when you're completely overwhelmed with emotion because you can't understand something, or it's too grand. So yeah, that's what I did. I looked at Journey through that lens.
Nice.
Journey, the game by that game company, where you're the little guy running around in the desert.
Oh, not the band. Okay.
Not the band, no.
I'm like, wow. Okay, that makes more sense.
Journey by that game company / Geneva Chen.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, it's immensely interesting to know that you have all these different perspectives that you are able to bring to the game, as far as just your own perspective and your own life experiences. With Destiny in particular, I'm curious if it's kind of a smorgasbord of just all these different philosophies and concepts being thrown together as from the writer's perspective, as well as the art design and the backdrops and their choices for all of the different aspects that you have in the game. Is there something in particular that you are drawn to in Destiny?
Actually, I just really enjoyed the gunplay. I didn't really get into the lore.
Yes!
I started, and I like the fact that unlike most FPS, it's really beautiful. Like, your Call of Duties, your Medal of Honors, it's all like green and beige and brown. And here you've got like these rainbow space wizards running around. So that was really. And then I started reading the Grimoire, and I was kind of blown away by it. And the thing I liked about the Grimoire, which a lot of people hated, was how scattershot it was. You know, how it's like you had to like pull like pieces of evidence from like all these different sources. And the Rings a lot before that, the Tolkien Legendarium, and you have to do the same thing in that fandom because you've got Lord of the Rings, you've got The Hobbit, you've got the Silmarillion, you've got the Book of Lost Tales, History of Middle Earth, and they often contradict each other, and you have to decide which one is more likely to be canon, and which part would overrule another part. And you've got all these unreliable narrators, and you got to kind of piece it together by yourself. And I really enjoy that kind of detective work, but putting it together like a puzzle. So yeah, that's why I kind of fell into the Destiny lore hole and never climbed out.
Absolutely. I mean, the lore, what do you think of the development as far as their movement from the, I guess, pieces we got in D1 of the different aspects in the stories to the book style that they're releasing books now?
Yeah, there's still sort of like little pieces of ancillary pieces. It's kind of like, again, to use the Lord of the Rings analogy, it's like the difference between the novels and the appendices. I like the fact you've got these big chunks that you can just sit down and digest, but you've also got little lore cards on the exotics and things like that to sort of, what's the word, complement it. It's just a really fun system they've set up. I really enjoy it.
Nice. What's your favorite story?
Oh God, the first one that really grabbed me was the Ishtar Collective. Maya Sundaresh and all the possible worlds and the copies, because I think that's a really interesting philosophical point. Are they the same people? Are they the same people initially, or do they go off and become different people? And that you get that question with the Exos as well, and with Guardians. When they're first resurrected, are they the same person? As like Aldrin, Aldrin 2.0. Is he the same person? Should we still be angry at him? Or because he has a clean slate, is he a completely different person? There's all these interesting questions about personal identity because of memory loss and duplication. Do you remember that? Yeah, do you remember that Star Trek episode where Riker got split in the transporter? Into it's the same kind of idea. Like, are they the same person? When did they cease to be? When did they start being different people?
Right.
So yeah,
different
it was the
experiences.
Yeah. So it was the Ishtar Collective initially. Oren's story, I think, is heartbreaking. And I anything to do with the Dark Age, because it's so mysterious and the apocalypse porn. And I really like that. The Iron Lord stories. I love anything to do with the Iron Lords and the Dark Age. And, yeah.
I know that you are a super supporter of Zavala and defending him on Twitter. That's
yes.
the thing I see you most often having to argue with people, because there's the argument for Aldrin, which I think most people have kind of come around to not being so angry at him, but Zavala still gets a bad rap.
He does, yeah. I do find it incredible that people are kind of over the guy who actually killed Kate, but they're still mad at Zavala. I do find that very, very strange. But yeah, Zavala appeals to me because I've always liked characters who are driven by duty. And I know a lot of people like sort of morally. I'm kind of tired of morally grey characters. Maybe it's an age thing. I'm at the stage where I like characters who are, unequivocally not necessarily good, but they have a code.
Like Petra and Zavala kind of share that they have their duty that they hold to their particular group.
Yeah, and I think that's why they butt heads so much, because they're both, very convinced that their particular position is right, but they're kind of unopposed. Well, they were. I don't know if they still are. I get the feeling they might have come around to each other a little bit now. But yeah, Zavala was my favorite character from. I played, Destiny 1 vanilla, and I read his Grimoire card, and it referenced Basho, and I was like, yes, this is the one. This is the one I'm going to hyperfixate on. He references obscure Japanese poetry. This is the one. So,
not Shax with the Shakespearean quotes or anything like that.
Well, I mean, Shakespeare too. He quotes Henry IV, Part 2, I think it is, and he references Hamlet at the end of the Mithrax quest. So I wonder who taught who Shakespeare first.
That's a good question.
Yeah, who introduced who to Shakespeare? Because they both obviously love the bard. So yeah, I wonder if the thing with Zavala is I think he's quite a difficult character to get. He's not very accessible. I think contrast with Cade. Cade's funny and he talks a lot, and there's a lot of lore that's very easy to get because you get it in the course of quests. Zavala, it's much more kind of buried underneath. You got to listen to his idle dialogue.
But there's also the aspect that Kate is relatable. Everybody knows a friend who's going to be funny and kind of that jokester who's not going to listen to anything.
Yeah.
Whereas I think there are fewer people today who are the duty bound, the people who are just utterly devoted to their not just position but to protecting and being in that kind of position. Unless you're in the military, I don't know too terribly many people who exude that on a normal basis.
Yeah. Rarer today. And I also think it's the case of it's probably difficult to relate to someone who, Destiny's got Destiny's very funny in a lot of ways, but there's also this kind of grim, dark, apocalyptic aspect to it as well. But you have this character who just sort of maintains his faith. He's Zavala's faith is unshakable, and that's kind of an extreme character trait that I think can be quite difficult to grasp. But for me, I find characters who kind of retain their moral code in the face of all these setbacks, this darkness. I find that really compelling. Like I said, that does a lot more for me personally than someone like the Drifter, who's more morally grey, and you don't know which way they're going to go. That's just my personal preference.
I think Blue would agree with you on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say the other thing too with the Zavala piece is that whereas I think the reason that a lot of people have have difficulty forgiving Zavala is that Zavala's present in the game, whereas Uldren is not. And so I think it's a lot of times, I think the other thing is people fixate on the immediate concern, which I think is also maybe potentially a nod to what's causing problems with Zavala. Zavala doesn't necessarily focus on the immediate problem. He's also trying to focus on the bigger problem, like with the whole thing with Rasputin. I know a lot of people gave him grief for that. And I don't necessarily agree with the way that he did it, but what he was trying to do was, he's ultimately trying to look out for the bigger picture, which, take it or leave it, first-person shooter gamers are not necessarily going to be fixated on the bigger picture. That's not normal for a first-person shooter campaign to have a grand arcing story, really, that you can access. Like, it's not necessarily something like Call of Duty's always this mission, run down this hallway, get point A, and then go to point B, and then mission over, watch a big cutscene. That's kind of the formula that all first person shooters kind of have over the years kind of developed into. So whereas like MMOs, single player RPGs, I find it interesting that the people that I know that come from that background are usually actually the ones that don't have a problem with, what you were talking about with Zavala. They understand it. They might not agree with it. Like there's that definitely, like, there's people who don't, but there's not like this, like, oh, well, he just doesn't know what he's doing. No, it's like, they're just like, I just don't think you shouldn't be focusing on that. Like they understand a grander campaign or grander scheme of things. But I really do get the feeling too that a large part of the tendency to forgive Uldren is actually probably more likely the tendency to forget Uldren, because he's not in the tower every time you load in. He's not just standing there, which will be interesting if when he ever comes back. I'm going to be curious to see the flux of emotions that people have going through that.
Yeah, there's that part in the Chronicron where the Shadow of Callus kills Uldren over and over and over again. I wonder if that was meta commentary on the writer's part.
Yeah,
a lot of people were talking
I think
about
that I think that was Jill's catharsis on a number of things.
Yeah. I can't wait for Uldren to get back. Like, I reacts.
Me too.
Like, yeah, that's going to be interesting.
On so many different levels, you're going to have so many, not just aspects of people coping with him as a guardian, but also his role. What role is he going to play?
Yeah.
We don't know yet.
You can just imagine him walking through the city, and it's like, why is everyone looking at me like this? What
Oh
did
my
I
gosh,
do?
man. Those are some of the best webcomics, is the whole thing where it's like him trying to figure out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad, but it's so funny at the same time. What was the other one? The one where Zavala's like it's like I don't agree that this is gonna happen at all, but like Zavala like he loads in and it's the webcomic where Zavala just like loses his mind, and Icor is like no, and he's just like pummeling him. I'm like, yeah, if something's gonna make Zavala snap, I can see that maybe being it. Like, just because
I've
again,
seen it done the other way around as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen one with like Icor and Nova trying to Nova bombing and Zavala.
Oh gosh! Oh no! See, like, I just think, going back again to like Zavala being like this character who's driven by his faith, like, that faith of being, the traveler choosing the light, and the light being, quote unquote the right, not the wrong way. I'm interested to see his reaction to the information that Uldren has been resurrected, simply because I'm curious about how he will take that up in light of his understanding of what the light is, because you have this pseudo Christian type concept of like the wealth or the right of the light, and the paradise-esque type concept of we're fighting for a higher good. And then you take that and you have a character such as Uldren, arguably a lot of characters. I mean, I'm doing some work with the Karnstein armlets, and the Guardian who created those, it's very questionable about the goodness of the Risen. I mean, even though they might not have memories, you have like warlords, you have rogue light bearers, all these things. I'm really curious about if we're ever going to see like a more under the hood look of Zavala's justifications for how that fits within his faith that the light is the good, as opposed to this in this binary light dark realm that we kind of exist in, which is kind of weird because even that has its own shades of gray.
Yeah, I mean, he was around in the dark age, and I mean, he was a pupil of Saladin, so he would have maybe had direct experience of warlords. He might have had indirect experience through Saladin, so he'd certainly have had experience of that before. And I kind of wish we had more introspection with Zavala. That the only source we have is the pilgrimage lore card where he goes to Io. I love that lore card. And one passage in particular that I absolutely adore is where he's thinking about that. He's thinking about Basho and the poison lake that draws animals to it and then kills it, and then that makes him think of the traveler. So he's not completely unaware of the traveler's status as maybe a danger as well as a salvation. But I think he very on that. He would never say that in public because he wants the Guardians to fight for the light, because he believes that's the most utilitarian. Utilitarian the right word?
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing too is they're also, kind of swinging back into like maybe the topic that we originally were thinking about is like the perspective. The other thing is like we're talking about curious of what his point of view is, but then we have to realize that what we see is what he is presenting to all the Guardians. So it's not necessarily what is going to be what he thinks, which is weird to kind of voice, but that's the other thing that you have to keep in mind with, like, that's one of the things that I love about the lore of Destiny is that it's all in character lore. Like, there's no impartial narrator necessarily. It's just all, this is in-game lore. Or in-game perspective So it's like, you have to have that bias taken into account, which is a really interesting thing. I think a lot of people tend to overlook at the first blush because of that's not something that's normal within a lot of even video games in general. You don't have always a lot of that.
Yeah, usually. Sorry, go on. I was going to say, yeah, usually it's all there in the manual. And yes, the manual can actually actively mislead you. So,
right? Yeah. I got a copy of the Arms and Armament thing from the vanilla collector's edition, and it's really interesting, the stuff that I'm reading, and I'm like, but that's not true. We know that's not right. I'm like, but it's from the beginning, it's been that way. I found that really kind of intriguing.
So my question is, would we consider every character an unreliable narrator because of that? Because it's all through their own eyes.
Well, okay, so here's the thing: this is where I really agree with Kex, and and the thing this actually ties into some stuff that you deal with in reality, right? Eyewitnesses are not the end all be all, because eyewitnesses are in and of themselves not reliable. Human memory is fickle at best, if you really want to get to it. And everyone has an agenda. Everyone has, and that's not a nefarious thing. That's just everyone has the way that they view reality, and everything is colored by that perception. So it's not that I would. That's all to say that I would not go as far to say that all sources of information are unreliable. I think that what would be more appropriate to say is that we have to recognize that all sources have a bias. And as long as you take into account that bias, we've talked about this with Purple before. As long as you take into account that bias, then you can safely perceive the information that is being presented by those individuals.
LittleSheBear, what do you think about the question?
Yeah, I think so long as you have to look at what's the character's motivation. What's their end game. I think it's kind of I think one of the relationships that kind of crystallizes the Speaker versus Osiris. Osiris is after truth and knowledge and everything, and this is threatened by him because I kind of see the city as a little bit like Plato's Republic, in that it's built on a noble lie. Because Plato said, if you're raising these people away from their parents on an equal footing, how are you going to get them to be loyal to the city? And his solution was, you have to tell a noble lie. You have to say they came from the soil, and they're the same as the city, and that's why they will protect the city. That's why they will protect the Republic. And I think the Speaker did something similar. You had warlords and rogue light bearers running around killing each other, enslaving people. And then the Speaker comes along and says, no, we serve the Traveler. We are guardians of the light. We have to protect people. This is what we're here for. I speak for the Traveler. I know this. What I do. And everyone goes, oh, yeah, okay. And then, kind of, you get this era of relative peace. And then Osiris comes along and goes, yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
And that's probably why the Speaker was so anti-Osiris. It's not necessarily that he's against knowledge. It's more that he worries what will happen if what was potentially a noble lie is unmasked as a lie. Because I think I get the feeling that the city is constantly on a kind of a knife edge. The political system in the city, it's crap, basically. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that ties into what you're saying too about the noble lie, is because as soon as someone realizes that this fine balance doesn't actually need to be here, you're going to have faction wars and.
Yeah, I think the city's always a hop and a skip away from another faction war. I don't think it would take much.
I would agree with that.
So yeah, you have to. So yeah, I think when you're looking at how to interpret lore, I think you have to think about the characterization and what the character wants and why would they say this. Or are they being truthful, or do they have an agenda? So you kind of have to kind of trace the thread from personality to characterization to motivation, and then kind of figure out why they're saying what they're saying and whether it's true or not.
So we can
Yeah.
have unreliable narrators that are telling like a purpose. They know they're being unreliable. They're purposefully deceiving in some respects, whether it's the noble truth or not a noble truth, but like the noble lie, versus a character like Drifter who is purposefully misleading on certain things to manipulate a situation. Which, granted, that is exactly what the speaker
noble
does.
lie
it's
is.
just right.
Yeah.
It's the question of at what point are you comfortable saying that the lie is worth telling, which is where the Plato, that's the whole thing with the noble lie, is that it's the fact is that it's not the truth. I mean, if you're going to get down to brass tacks, you are deceiving your populace. But the question is, does the populace need to know the truth? I mean, and that's again, that that happens today. We have right now in politics, we have a huge debate going on about whether or not certain information should be allowed into open courts. Is classified information allowed? Because there's the ever present booger bear of national security. And that's not just America. That's pick a country that's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, pick a country. And I think that is a variant of the reality that we exist in. And I think that might be also where you get some of the vehemence against the speaker. Is I've noticed a pattern in some of the people who are very vehement against the speaker. They also have very particular views about the way reality works. And that's not a dig at them. There is a kind of a weird little correlation that I've noticed, which is, again, perspective. If you think that this is wrong, then you think this is wrong, and that's going to be amplified in a fictional setting, because no one's going to come to you overnight and tell you to not talk against the speaker, because the speaker's made up. Too dark?
Nah, it's one of the oldest moral questions, and we're still dealing with it. Like, is it okay to do something morally, what would normally be considered to be morally bad, like tell a lie, if it ends up in a good result? A utilitarian would say, yes, that's a good thing to do because it ends up in a good result. A Kantian or a deontologist will say, no, you can never tell a lie, because if you tell a lie, the whole concept of truth becomes,
subjective,
meaningless. Yeah, it's meaningless. You cannot have truth if you tell lies. So but we're still grappling with this. That's one of the fun things about philosophy. You're never going to get a right answer. That's kind of why I like it.
I think you and Blue share that in common, as far as like history of both of you.
It's just it's one of those things where you have to be with philosophy and with all that stuff, especially political philosophy and political history, you have to be comfortable with looking at really uncomfortable situations, because the thing is at the end of the day, there's some bad situations that they didn't end badly, and so a lot of people are like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's like, it's like, but is it? Like, I mean, there's some questionable stuff that did, I mean, it's and history, as history goes and as time passes, obviously it lessens the blow in a lot of things. One of the prime examples that I always find intriguing is the difference of views between the Nazi regime and the Mongolians. I'm like, I mean, most people know the atrocities performed during the World Wars from the Nazis, but then not many people are familiar with equally, if not worse, atrocities performed by Genghis Khan. I mean, there's it's just interesting to me, because the only really big difference there is the time that separates those two,
and the visibility of it.
Yeah, the documentation.
Well, yeah, and I mean, which actually goes back to what I was saying about the Mongolians, is because they were just better at eradicating the documentation against them.
Yeah.
So here's a question, as far as if we're reading through or listening to different characters within the game, say Drifter or Toland or any of these characters who are giving us information, is there a way that we can kind of sort of assess what's going on? The problem that I find that it's super easy to automatically dismiss something that Drifter says, yet people will oftentimes take into account of other characters who would not necessarily be reliable in the situation, but because they are a more favorable character, they tend to give it more credit. Is there a way to counter it?
I mean, that's human nature, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that I go back to with what I refer to as the Kexian chart. It's the question of impartial judgment towards eyewitnesses, which is very difficult. I mean, it's a problem. It's something that even in a non-fictional environment is very tough. It's why law enforcement has to go through so much training to determine whether or not an eyewitness is considered to be reliable or not. You don't just have witness bias, you also have investigative bias, and that's a real thing. Like, I think the problem too, for me, the problem is we don't have enough inner dialogue between the characters. So like it's hard to see, oh, this character is definitely, not trustworthy. It's like, well, I don't know. Like, I mean, the drifter has a lot of things where history points that he's not truthful, but then you start, like, for example, the whole thing with Orin. You start kind of uncovering it, and you're like, oh, it's not that you're deliberately lying. It's that this hurts. It's painful for you. And, and you don't necessarily, and that's like the whole question on, was Orin and him in a relationship? I'm still on the firm camp that yes, they were. But, that does color, the whole actual history of relationships colors how we perceive the information too. And so in the, I don't know, it's the human conundrum of not having a full picture of anything other than even our own experience. We don't have a full picture.
Yeah, I just got my Grimoire Volume 2 delivered yesterday.
Oh,
Yay,
nice.
in Europe.
Nice.
The Fallen Kingdoms. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. I was reading after the Concordat were exiled, and they were deciding who they should let into the consensus in their place. And it just struck me that like you don't even know who's speaking in that lore. Apart from the only person you know who's speaking at one point is Zavala when he's replying to a question. But other than that, it's just dialogue, and you don't know, and you have no idea who's talking. So like there's all these gaps that you just can't assess because like, well, is that Hideo? Is it Saladin? Who's speaking right now? We don't know. It's so hard to evaluate. It's very elliptical. There's all these gaps that you have to fill in, which can be fun, but it could be frustrating as well.
Absolutely. Speaking of frustrating, what about Callus? Do we still write that off as propaganda at this point? Because there are things that are starting to come to pass that make you wonder whether or not if they just got lucky or if the writers are toying with us at this point, because there are things that are starting to happen that are like, there's a pyramid ship in the moon.
Yes.
That was mentioned. There were things mentioned that are similar, and it's almost enough of a fortune cookie in the Callus cards to be able to fit just about anything to it. But at the same time, there are details that it's like, okay, is he as unreliable as we thought initially?
I mean, it's definitely propaganda. There's no question there. But the best propaganda usually has a kernel of truth. And I think that's this really funny background dialogue that I just got with Zavala, where he says, please tell Benedict that his actions are noted. So like the Vanguard know that there are these frames spying on them. So they're probably picking up little bits of what goes on in the tower and they're reporting it back. So that's probably going into the Chronicron. So I just find it really funny because it's so outlandish and it's so silly and self-aggrandizing. but there are bits where you think, oh, maybe. Yeah, I love that lore. I just find it very funny, but it's also very intriguing. The way it's written is funny.
Mm-hmm.
But
Joe
there's
did a great job with it.
Yeah, but there's these little bits where you're like, oh god, no, that's disturbing.
Like Drifter eating himself to death.
Yes!
Oh, why do we have to do the Hannibal scene? Why did we have to do the Hannibal scene?
One. I think it's such a it's the most.
I mean, it's so on the nose. Like
it's like The Simpsons, the ironic punishment division.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all I could think of was Hannibal, where he makes the guy eat his own brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, it is like that.
I'm like, oh, why? Why do we have to do this? that scene made me uncomfortable as it was.
Yeah, but like there's bits that he clearly knows what's going on in the tower, because there's a bit where they ask Ava to be the master of ceremonies, and like he clearly knows that Ava is stone cold bad and would never do that, even though she looks like a granny.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that the Guardian is angry at Aldrin. Like there's all these little bits that he knows about. Because I love Hawthorne and Zavala, I totally ship them. I will never stop laughing at the chicken nuggets and chill.
Oh my gosh.
That card is so funny. That card is so funny. Yeah, I just find it interesting that those two were put together. Like, regardless of how you see their relationship, I think it's plausible that he's grooming her for a leadership position. Medium of checkers, but
nice.
Somehow, yeah.
I don't know. Wouldn't she have to have a different? I don't like. Is there any positions you wouldn't put her necessarily Hunter Vanguard, but like where would you shift? There would have to be a position created. Would she be?
Yeah.
But I mean,
have a
that's
seat on the consensus. Would she be?
Well, but I mean, they're already talking about dismissing the Vanguard,
right?
And Oxygen, SR. So I mean, it's and with her being in charge of the intercity relations department, if you will, with the whole clan thing. I mean, that's the whole thing. If you listen to Hawthorne's idle dialogue, she's talking about clans interacting with civilians, and how that has, it seems like that's not a thing that had been really prevalent before the Red War. And that was large part because the Guardians were sequestered away from the civilians. It still bugs me because I swear, Green, you and I talked about this. I landed in the tower. First idle dialogue I heard was, "Oh, we caught another shipment to Wormspore to the city." I'm like, no, no, none of this. Stop with the militia anti-Guardian nonsense that's going on.
Well, you also have the disgruntled aspects.
Oh my gosh!
Characters angry at not only Guardians or New Monarchy. There's just so many different.
They really don't like New Monarchy.
No.
There was one.
That's a mood, to be honest.
I don't blame them too much for that one. There was one that I heard. I hadn't heard it in a while, but it was oh god, what was it? It was basically there's contracts being given out, which is not a surprise, but it's like there was one where they were talking about like Dead Orbit undermining the others to get the contract or something. I'm like, I want like entries that just like detail the daily like lives of civilians, just like the nonsense that they have to put up with, like just the absolute insanity that they're like, wait, what? Why are we? This seems like a bad idea, Ikora. Okay, can I have some safety goggles? No? Okay, right. Cool.
Have you heard? Go for it.
I was going to say there must be an area below the tower that's just because of how many Guardians jump off it.
Oh, I mean, gosh. There's a betting pool. There's a betting pool about that. Like, oh my gosh.
It's one of those things like, yeah, the jumper was a Guardian. Is that the one?
Oh god! Oh no!
Stand by for confirmation. It was a Guardian.
Oh no! I'm like, it's funny, but not funny at the same time.
I know, it's one of those things, like, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but I am.
It's just
Oh,
nice to see the different perspectives actually brought to life. Like,
well,
would
it
freak
grounds
out
you in,
over
it
and over and
grounds you in
over.
it grounds you in the difference of the reality that Destiny exists in, right? Like, I mean, like in our world, we have, oh no, someone jumped, or whatever, and that's like cause for significant concern. Whereas in Destiny's world, they're like, oh, was it a guardian? Like you can tell, like
Right.
there's like this hesitation to put like concern. It's like, oh, it wasn't a guardian. Oh no, like
Right.
but then it's a guardian. Just roll your eyes and move on with your life. They'll probably dance it off.
And then, like in the real world, we debate like the morality of boxing. Like, should it be allowed? Given all the health problems, the fact that it promotes violence, yada yada. And then in the city, you've got people watching Crucible for
Oh
entertainment,
God.
where people are literally killing each other, and it's
Mhm.
it's entertainment. Like,
Talk about betting pools.
yeah, like it's properly dystopian when you think about it. Anyway,
Yeah, no, good. I'm just trying to think through, since we're kind of discussed the fact that pretty much every character, just based off of their just misremembering things or not intentionally lying, but then you also have the narrators that are intentionally deceiving, Mara, Drifter, some of those, whether it's for like good or for bad. Is there anyone that you personally would be more cautious about listening to than others? And we mentioned Callus, and I've mentioned Drifter a few times. Mara, is there anyone that you're just like, hey, that one we should be careful? It's just a bunch
Toland,
of
for sure.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And Green is happy.
yes.
I mean, it's not. You're not wrong. I mean, I would flip it on its head though and say that it's actually harder for me to think of someone that I wouldn't be cautious of listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because the thing is like, and this goes back to the thesis that I did in college, and we had to do a different comparison between quantitative and qualitative psychology, and which is really eye opening, because arguably the people who do the most damage are actually the people who don't realize that they're biased, and it's because like people who are biased, they will, or for better or worse, people who are biased and who are intentionally biased, like they tend to have like a tell, like you kind of they know that they're hiding something, and so there's like there's unconscious knowledge that they are hiding something, and there's going to be an inconsistency possibly, like there's a better chance of finding that, whereas people who are unconsciously biased about things, in their mind, they are telling you the complete and absolute truth. There is no reason to hide because, it's like it's the conviction that they know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing there that's like, oh, well, maybe this could be wrong, but I'm going to say it. Like there's not anything like that.
Yeah.
Which is why, if you read fiction and stuff like that, that's why some of the greatest plot twists are the people who don't realize that they're being in a plot twist, because in their minds they're not. They are 100% dedicated to plan A, when plan A is actually just a small part of the overall plot, which is why I both love and absolutely can't stand Destiny lore dives, because it's like oh, this answer is here, oh no, we got a conflicting answer over here, and like which one's more trustworthy?
I mean, generally in literature, if you were looking at this from a kind of an English lit perspective, if it's a first person narration, it's probably unreliable. Third person sort of omniscient narrator, chances are it's more reliable, but not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think A Song of Ice and Fire is a really good example of this. George R. R. Martin is very good at writing as an omniscient narrator, but he still weaves the biases of point of view characters into the prose.
Yeah, which actually is structurally really enjoyable. I can't stand this. I can't stand the books, but that I do recognize. I recognize the skill that takes.
Yeah. So, I mean, rule of thumb, third-person narration, omniscient narrator, you're probably relatively safe, but it's still not 100%. So, yeah, still Destiny lore, very unreliable. You never.
Blue, what do you like? I'm kind of at the end of the questions I wanted to pick both your brains about.
I mean, I
You
guess
have some-
I think that kind of was actually what I was going to say too, is like, how do you determine which ones to trust and which ones not to trust? Not necessarily trust. Trust might not be the best word, but which accounts to hold with more weight. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm gonna get I'm hesitating because I know I'm gonna get I know I'm gonna get in trouble for this next question, and I might edit it out, but that's the nice thing about being offline. With works, and Green's gonna know exactly what I'm talking about here. With works of fiction, so we have in-game unreliability.
Mm-hmm.
With works of fiction, I'm curious about your thoughts as to at what point do you have to retain the perspective of the writer? Like, yeah, I know. I'm seriously doubting that I will keep this in, but I'm just curious of my own on SheBear's opinion on this. Like, if character A,
if the writer, do you put weight of the writer's opinion outside of game, or writer's perspective outside of game? Say somebody asked the writer a question about this particular lore, do you hold that up at such high standards that it is absolute truth based off that is the original source of who wrote it?
So are you asking authorial intent versus death of the author?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I lean towards death of the author myself. I think the work should stand
for itself.
On its own yeah.
Okay. I am right there with you. I am just curious because as we get further, and this isn't really meaning to target any single individual, but my intent here is to say, as we get more and more into yeah, sorry, my dog decided that there's something outside that is needing to be warned about. Give me just a second. She'll stop here in a second, I hope. Okay. Nope, never mind.
We had mine in the background. It's fine.
I'm whatever. I'm going to continue. Listen, people listening, just whatever. It's a dog. My point is, like, as we get more people who are maybe not familiar with the inconsistencies that are embedded within Destiny's lore just naturally, I think that needs to be called out, that, sometimes the authors will have opinions that are not necessarily indicative of the actual story, and sometimes, they are chosen to write pieces with the narration teams understanding that they're going to get, a specific type of writing. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious.
Sorry, with my phone going on. Sorry.
Nope, no worries. I had a dog. You have a phone.
Oh dear. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you continue.
But I was curious if you, when you're talking about works of fiction, where does the line between authorial intent stop and the actual validity of in-game material begin?
There was a Scottish poet whose name is completely escaping me right now. One of his poems was chosen as a close reading exercise, and they got him to sit the paper, and he got 6 out of 20. Like, he completely failed the paper.
Oh no!
On his own poem.
Nice.
Amazing.
Oh, that's so funny.
But also, like apparently Henry James turned screw. Like, he was just what he thought from his point of view. He was writing a straightforward ghost story, but a lot of people interpret it as, the mental breakdown of the protagonist, which is probably the more interesting interpretation. But that's not what he intended. So I think it's really difficult to say what was intended and what wasn't, and sometimes things that aren't intended are probably more interesting or meaningful. So I would say.
But I guess in that perspective though, if the stated intention of the author was X, but everyone agrees that it's actually this.
Yeah.
Which one is more true, right? Like, which one would be more? I don't know. Like that's to me, I
don't think you can be objective about this stuff. I think it's always going to be subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the author says it doesn't mean that Y isn't valid. I think. Personally.
Well, it's the interpretation of the masses. Like what is meant as the actual interpretation from the author doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to be read. You were just trying to explain that, and so the concept of a writing team on top of it just throws it into a whole new loop, because you have the intent of the authors as well as the studio, and what direction they're trying to head, and it may not read like that absolutely at all. So
that goes back to the comment about the work standing on its own, right?
Right, the death of the author, or the concept of that. So there are moments that it's hard not to interpret things once you get to the author's perspective in such a way that it makes it very hard to remain unbiased yourself, because you see it through the goggles of the author now. You don't see it as the intended audience anymore.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, that's really that's like very similar to my whole thing with John and the Dark Tower, like with the similarity that we found, or that a number of us have seen with the Dark Tower and the story of Shin and Rezel and all of them, and then we were talking to him. He's like, "Oh, that's really interesting. That's not at all what I was thinking about." It's like, I'm like, all right, wow. It's like
I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah, his whole thing was like, I was thinking Mulan, and what's the villains from the Disney Mulan? He's like, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah, the Hun. Yeah, I was like, okay, that's a bit of a different flavor, but I can see it. But the question then goes back to, if it's not in the actual work, though, I guess the argument could be made there that it's not in the work. It's not in the text. It's not in the text.
Yeah, I mean, there's degrees of it. I mean, yes, you could interpret the turn of the screw as one woman's sort of descent into mental illness. You could never interpret it. You could never interpret it as recipe for fruit salad. Like it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
Right.
You've got to be reasonable. We talked about this on Twitter. Like, it's analyzing literature isn't you can say whatever you want. You have it is systematic. You do have to make reference to text. So like, you can't just like pull stuff out of your ass. You do have to kind of ground it in the text. But there's always this kind of nebulous area in the edges where people are going to have different interpretations and what it means.
Well, and as long as you can, I think the thing to keep in mind for everyone too is, as long as you can ground it in the text, technically it's valid.
Yeah.
Gotta love theory crafting.
Yeah. Really out there.
Should we start to kind of wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, no, sorry. Yes, I'm just thinking all the theories that I have different.
I am enjoying the conversation. I'm enjoying listening to you both from your different perspectives, because I do not have a literature or an ethics background necessarily, or a philosophy background. I just have my humble musician's background. So listening to the development of stories and the concepts of authorial intent versus not, or reliable narrators, it's like reading through stories about Mozart and the concepts of what happened with him. So it's very fun to hear it done in a different way, because the stories of Mozart in particular are not terribly reliable, mainly because the man was just kind of all over the place.
That's like Van Gogh or Van Gogh. He was
There's a lot of mythologizing.
Yeah, well, that, and he was, the whole combating systematic depression that he was fighting. Like a lot of times you see like almost it's a gross oversimplification, but it's almost a bipolar presentation of like either he's like, I'm the best there ever was, or there's like he's like, I don't deserve to be here, and it's like, that's a rough read too. But do you want to do shout outs?
Let's do that.
So that Green can go do what she originally planned to do.
Which is spend time with my wife, yes.
That's reasonable. Yeah.
Shout out to you, LittleSheBear, mainly from me, just because it's been a bit of a scheduling thing for us to be able to make this happen, and I'm really
time zones.
Yeah, very much so. I think you are 5 to 6 hours ahead of us.
Yes. It's nearly 8. Well, it's 8:10 for me. So.
Goodness.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad that we made this happen. I kind of actually hope that we can convince you to come on to the normal show, because I had a blast having you here. And
I would love to. Like, if I can get a day where I could stay up stupid late and I don't need to worry about keeping Mr. Bear up, then that would be great.
Yeah, let's make that happen.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Blue, shout out for you.
Same thing. Yeah, same thing. Just really enjoy getting a chance to talk about, like, slightly behind the scenes aspect of the research. We've talked about this with Purple a couple times, but hearing a different perspective of the same concept is always really enlightening, and also sometimes validating. It's like, oh, hey, we aren't entirely on the wrong page with our thoughts as far as like how to handle stuff, or the opposite of like, no, Blue's an idiot and he's overlooking this glaring thing that he needs to pay attention to.
It's still validating.
It's still validating. It's just a different form of validation. It's like, look, I'm human.
We all are.
So yeah, but a really, really big shout out to you for, again, putting up with our shenanigans on scheduling side.
That's fine.
So, and did you have anyone you wanted to give a shout out to?
Just my clanmates, Jules, Meg, Maura, Reed. They're some of my best friends I've ever made, I think.
Nice. Yeah. What clan is it?
Oh, well, we used to be in a clan called Fireteam Competence.
Nice.
And after like the PC thing came in, that kind of, a lot of people were stuck on PS4 and a lot of people were stuck on PC. We kind of split. We're now in a clan called Callus Skirt Clan.
Oh, nice.
I don't love the name. I'm alive. It's kind of fun.
It works. Works in progress.
Yeah, we didn't really meet sort of through playing the game. We met through sort of Tumblr and talking about meta and lore and yeah, so that was kind of weird.
Nice.
Didn't exactly meet through the game. We met through the game meta.
Nice.
Yeah. Just goes to show how important the meta in this game is.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
So.
But yeah. Goodbye.
Bye.
Blue is terrible at doing
I don't know
sign-offs.
I'm just